So I wanted to, I thought I'll do a blog article on my blog.
Okay.
Which is for SLPs, and talk about, I talk a lot about AAC, especially for beginning SLPs that are scared of AAC, which is a lot of people are scared of AAC. So I thought we could talk a little bit about your tips for that, and then any tips for help with implementation and getting buy-in from the stakeholders. So like the teachers and the paras and the parents, and how to, kind of try and pull all of that together. And then I wanted to, if we have time, talk about AT and AAC in the IEP.
Okay.
I know we touched on that in Flagstaff, and then so I want to talk about that again, and because we're putting together something for our district too, because we want to have sort of unified documentation for our district at least.
Okay, sure, absolutely. Sounds great. I could talk about this stuff for forever. So love this stuff.
I love it, love it. And I think I'm recording this. If I hit I think I am.
No, I see it. It says recording up in the corner.
Oh, good. So I don't really have to take notes. Yay.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're all good.
Okay.
So do we just want to jump in or start, or do you have questions? How do you want to roll?
Well, kind of what advice would you give to like an SLP that doesn't have a lot of experience with AAC, and she all of a sudden has a couple of, like, she gets a kiddo that has a device but nobody knows how to use it, or she gets someone that they say this kid needs help, so how are you going to help them?
Yeah. Okay. So absolutely. And this happens all the time, right, Ann? I mean, you know these people, and one of the reasons those SLPs that's happening is, and maybe your schooling was different. So I'd like to hear your story. But I know when I went to my undergraduate and graduate degree in speech pathology, there wasn't a lot of AAC. It was part of another class, and you took your test on it, but and of course this was over 20 years ago now. But some of the concepts that we're talking about today, which are much more prevalent, I wish they were covered back then 20 years ago, because they are the same content, But I wonder how much our practice has really changed over the last 20 years as far as pre-service goes. What was your experience at the undergraduate and graduate levels?
Well, undergrad, I didn't take anything, but that was a really long time ago. And then I only just recently got my master's degree in 2013.
Okay.
And it was online through Nova. And I was already kind of fascinated with AAC. So I know I took at least one full class. I think I took 2 classes in it because I was so interested in it. But I did find that and this is not knocking my school at all, but it was, it's such a big area, and it covered the theory, and it covered, sort of the different areas. But then you get out there in the real world and you're like, oh, I have no idea what to do here.
Absolutely. I think that is a very common experience. Either there hasn't been a lot of coursework. The coursework that they have taken has been, like you said, theory and not practical. And then, but the thing is, once you get out there, especially if you're working in a school setting, you are going to have lots of students with AAC. So I think that's something I know that ASHA is looking at as something. How can we change the requirements, and how can we change what the experience is at the pre-service level to meet that ever growing demand? So one of the things that I tell the SLPs who are new to this, and I've been doing this now for a handful of years, where we've been really changing the culture of our school district that we work for, where it's like the first thing is you have to own this, right? I try and tell the teachers that too, and try and encourage them and inspire them to want to own it, right? As opposed to like, we're going to talk to an administrator and they're going to make you do it. Yes, there's ways you can get people motivated that way, but it's much better when it's coming from you, when you're inspired to do it, when you see the need and have a passion for it. The outcome's just better than when someone's telling you you have to do it. So the very first thing I tell them is own it. And then the second thing that I find that is the biggest challenge, not just for the speech therapist, but everyone working in the field of AAC, working with students who are using AAC devices, actually has nothing to do with the device, has nothing to do with language. It just has to do with understanding people with disabilities. So we touched on it, I think, a little bit in Flagstaff when I was there, but there's this concept that really opened my eyes a lot in my practice, where I would go out and I would show people stuff and they just weren't getting it or using it. And I realized it was because they weren't really believing in the student could do it, or they didn't really see the need for why the student should do it. Well, this student is, in their mind, right? I'm going to paraphrase, but in their mind, this kid has his cognitive disability. They'll never learn to do this. And they're right. They won't if that's what you believe. If you're the one who's in charge of teaching them and you believe they'll never learn it, then they will never learn it. But if you have this experience and this expectation that they will learn it, then suddenly, and you believe that they'll learn it, if only they had the right tools and the right enough time that they'll learn it, then they can make all the progress and blow you away. And that's where really we start with the training. I really start with selling the idea of the least dangerous assumption, that you should not assume because someone has a cognitive disability or a disability that's impacting their language that they won't be able to do something that you are able to do. You should be able to expect that with enough training, enough time, and the right tools, they'll be able to do it as well.
I love that. Yeah. It is the expectation. And I think that people, we can let our fear and our not knowing how to work the device kind of get in the way and think, if I don't know how to do it, then how are they going to be able to do it?
Exactly, right? And so that least dangerous assumption is an article written by someone named Ann Donnellan, and then it was kind of espoused upon by someone named Cheryl Jurgensen. And, there's PDFs out there that you can read the articles for yourselves that kind of talk about just an approach. I think it's where that term presumed competence comes from. That's kind of the research articles behind it, the peer-reviewed research articles behind it. And then I would add that some people, I went to ATIA last January, so we're closing in on a year now since I went, but I was at a session where someone said, let's not call it presumed competence anymore because that confuses people. They're like, what does that really mean? They say presumed potential. So the idea that, everyone has within inside them this potential to learn language, not just say, I want goldfish cracker, but they can actually put words together and use different words and learn thousands of words if only we taught it to them. And I think that is where we start with the new AAC, the new speech therapist, the new teacher, the paraprofessional, the parent, is believing in that child, right? So moving on from there, though, besides that, the next thing we really talk about is, I think, to break it down into the kind of necessary components of understanding AAC. And we put together, I do this kind of like, I don't know, people in my neck of the woods, they call it like the Chris talk, where I come and I kind of give them these fundamental points about AAC, and I draw this little thing in quadrants. And just recently, one of the speech therapists, I gave her the talk, and she, Chris, I'm going to write this up and I'm going to make it a thing. And so she made a document and she wrote up. So I'll share it with you.
Oh, good.
It's for anyone who's listening, or you put it in the notes later, it's bit.ly/AAC quadrant, but it outlines kind of the necessary components of AAC. And the first one is that we talk about is snug. The idea that, okay, where are we going with this? On the last day, when the students walk out on the last day, what are we hoping the students will be able to do? Because so often, because we're writing IEPs, Anne, right, we think of what can a student do within the context of a year.
Right. Right.
beyond that, like where are we going when they are walking across that stage or rolling across that stage, or however they get across that stage? What do we want them to be able to do when they graduate? And that is what we shoot for is SNUG, spontaneous novel utterance generation. So that's number one. And we say that means we want to be able to be able to generate whatever they want to say, however they want to say it, and however they can say it, usually using a communication device. Then we talk about using, well, how are you going to do that? How are you going to teach thousands of words? So we say we do it the same way you eat an elephant with a fork, right? How do you eat an elephant with a fork, Ann? Do you know?
Time.
One bite at a time, right? So one bite at a time is we take them 1 or 2 words at a time, because so often the words are pairs, especially the early words that you might be teaching. So if I say stop, you're also going to teach
Go.
Right? If I say in, you say
Out.
Right? But if I say what, suddenly you're like, I don't know, when? What is it? Like you're not sure. So that's why sometimes we teach 1 word at a time, and sometimes we teach them in pairs, because sometimes if you're going to teach go, you might as well teach stop. So we tell them to teach 1 or 2 words at a time, and that doesn't mean till mastery. It just means like, all right, for this week or maybe 2 weeks, we're going to practice these words. We're going to have a focused lessons around these words, and then we're going to move on to the next set of words, and then the next set of words, and next set of words. And in the context of a school year, that means you are consistently introducing between 40 and 80 words a week. I mean, not a week, but in a school year, Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that what you tell people?
Well, we've started with some core words for some of the kiddos that have some pretty significant communication delays. And I kind of started experimenting with that a couple years ago. And I found that when we were trying to teach too many words at a time, and it just wasn't working. And so then when I noticed when I cut it down, and these are like pretty significantly, like they don't have a lot of communication ability yet. But when we cut it down to just teaching 1 word, like when we were just teaching more, like that's what we should start with because it's pretty easy.
Totally.
Yeah, we start with more, and then when they started getting that, then I'd add in another simple one like go, and then we could pair those and have more go or stop go, and then so we've just been kind of building on that. And then I tell people, kind of maybe model 1 step ahead while you're doing the modeling, but don't expect them to do like the 2 word utterance. Maybe you'll get 1 word, and then that's good.
Absolutely. We say the exact same thing, and we say we use the analogy of a staircase, right? So that a little baby is trying to crawl up the stairs. You don't stand at the top of the staircase going, "Hey, baby, get up here." You are on the same stair with them, or maybe 1 stair above, guiding them up. And so if you picture language like a staircase, then you don't want to be at the top of the staircase going, "Hey, kid, do you want to go outside today?" Too many words, just way too much. Trying to model all of that is too overwhelming for students and for the teachers trying to model on the devices. So, but so doing exactly what you said, keeping it 1 step above makes it way more digestible for people, for the student who's at a language level that's on that staircase on the language level, but also the communication partner that's partnering with that student. They can learn where those words are faster, Yeah. So you touched on it. Core vocabulary is the other thing that we harp on a lot. But we also talk about the fact that, so I think core vocabulary is one of those hot button topics. I think you'd even find that most speech therapists have heard about that, I've heard what core vocabulary is. But one of the confusing things I think about it is the fact that if you look at those core vocabulary lists, and you look at, there's like 300 words, 300 to 350 words, depending on which list you're using, that is considered core vocabulary. So just having core vocabulary isn't enough, because 300 to 350 words is, how do you organize all that? Like you need some sort of system for organizing 300 and 350 words. Like even if the kid walked out on the last day and you taught them all 300 to 350 words, they need some sort of system or structure for organizing just those words, let alone the fringe words. And so that is where we have really started harping on the motor planning aspects of language. Now, we've seen a lot of benefits of the LAMP instructional approach, which is not to be confused with the LAMP Words for Life application, right? A lot of people use those things synonymously, but just to be clear, so LAMP is a language acquisition through motor planning is an instructional approach, and then LAMP Words for Life is an app that uses that instructional approach, but you can use that instructional approach with other applications.
Right. I think people don't understand that sometimes.
Yeah, totally. I think that gets confused a lot. You say motor planning, they immediately go to that app as opposed to thinking of it in the broader context. So we really try and keep the word. Basically what it means is when you're developing the system, whatever it might be, or acquiring a system or putting a system in place, first of all, we think of that is the system and where are you going with it, so that you know that if you have some sort of static board, that someday if you're modeling and training and you're teaching and you have these high expectations, then someday you're going to have to move away from that board as their primary mode and go to something that has even more robust, right? Just recognize that that's something you might have to do. So if you are doing that, try and keep the words in a very similar place so that the motor plans change minimally. You know, where the things are located have minimal impact on the student. You know, it's just like, I don't know if you have a family member and that you ever use their cell phone or, you know, and like my wife, for instance, she'll be driving and she'll be like, just text my mom real quick on my phone. Can you just answer her? Right. And so I'll go over and get her phone and I'll be like, where is your chat app? It's not in the right spot, you know, because it's for me and I can do it. Right. Or if you rented a car, you know, if you ever rented a car, it takes you a minute to figure out where everything is. You can do it, but why would you want to do that? You know, if it was all in the same spot, it can be that much more proficient and efficient. Same thing with students, right? If you keep the words in the same spot, then they can be that much more proficient and efficient. And especially students that have significant language difficulties, why are we going to make them rechange or relearn where the words are? You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And that's why I think this is a mistake that people make sometimes. I know I did for sure. Was this is years ago. I know better now. But I would think, you know, when I saw a screen that had like 40 squares on it, I thought, there is no way this kid doesn't know any of these. It's just going to confuse him. And so I thought it would be better to just start with 4 and then build up. But it takes that whole motor planning piece out. So now I explain that to people and say, you know, we're better off. We can just mask out a few of those for those squares while we're teaching, but then, you know, make sure we put them back in for some time of modeling and so that they can eventually have those.
And I tell the same story. I made the same mistake. So did many of us. You know what I mean? There's more people that I hear talk about how they were doing that exact same thing. Like, you know, I tell a story about, you know, it's 15 years ago now, but I saw a student and I gave her, you know, she's got to learn yes, no on these buttons. And then we'll move from yes, no to 4 cell and 4 to 8, 8 to 16, you know, and years go by and I see her again and she's using the same yes, no switch and she still hasn't mastered that. I'm like, wait, something's wrong here. You know, it was one of my first alerts that I needed to kind of go on a little quest for myself to figure out what the heck am I supposed to do with AAC, because that is not it, you know?
Yes, and yes and no is hard to teach. I learned that too, because that was one of the things I did. And I thought, okay, let's start real simple and we'll just start yes and no with this kiddo. Well, that's not real simple for some kids.
Absolutely not, right? Because it can, yes, no questions can be so abstract, you know, you think they're concrete, but not necessarily. So the last piece we talk about, you mentioned it, is when I talk about those quadrants, you know, the last quadrant we talk about is the aided language stimulation piece, which you mentioned is the modeling, you know, which sounds so simple when you say it, you know, you just model on the student's device, but in practice it is very difficult. I found, you know, that it's awkward for people to do at first. And it's hard for them to wrap their brains around. And I found there's been a lot of parent guilt that I found. Like I'll do a training and talk to people about it, and then the parents will come back and like, man, it's just so hard. You know, it's hard enough to get dinner on the table and get them to the other kids to soccer practice or whatever. And now you want me to carry this thing around and model on it. And so we have a lot of conversations about how just doing, if you modeled if you model at all, you're doing more than a lot of people are, and then breaking that modeling down to making it, like you said, simple. Like, okay, just if you can, tonight we're working on put, that's the word of the week. We're working on put. So bring the student over, and after dinner, they're going to, each time you're putting a fork in the dishwasher, it's just put, and each time you're just modeling without even necessarily the expectation that they're going to do it, just so you can learn where put is and you can get the flow of how it goes. We do a lot of role play that way, and we've been really looking at, have you heard of the impact model at all, Anne?
I don't think so.
Yeah, so it's something I've recently learned about too in the last handful of years, and learning about it and then being able to actually put it in place is a different thing. But the impact model is something I think it was Carol Binger came up with it, and maybe, I can't remember, I'm pretty sure it was Carol Binger. But the idea was that instead of focusing our time, the speech therapy time, on working with the student directly, we could spend more time working with the communication partners, like the paraprofessionals and the teachers. And instead of trying to, I'm going to pop in and I'm going to model for you, and you see what I'm doing? Okay, now you do it, go. That sort of approach hasn't been working as well as we had hoped. I bet you there's a lot of speech therapists are like, they see me coming down the hall, like, quick, grab the thing because that person's coming down the hall,
Yeah.
And so they kind of tackled this approach, and they came up with this, the impact model, which is breaking it down into smaller chunks. So if you wanted to teach a specific strategy, like, I want you to sit here and I want you to model with this book, and during this book, this little reading book that you have together, you're going to read this book together, and I want you to model during this small chunk of time where you're just going to read this book together. And we're going to break that down into how are we going to teach it? Well, first, I'm actually going to pull you out of the room. We're going to watch videos of other people doing it. And then, so that's step one. And then step two is you're going to watch me do it with the student. And then step three is actually going to pull you out again. And we're going to role play it where I pretend I'm the student and you're the teacher, and you get to practice it with me, right? So you're not have to do it in a live situation first. You're going to do it with me first. And then we're going to practice the mnemonic of whatever strategy we're learning. Here's how I want you to read this book. And then the last part, we're going to actually, then you're going to go in and I'm going to watch you do it. I'm going to coach you through it. Oh, I really liked how you pointed to each symbol as you were modeling for the student, And so it's taking this, what seems to be for you and I as speech therapists, well, we could probably sit down and do a session like that. For a paraprofessional who's not trained like we are, did not have the years of experience that we got to go through, it's kind of breaking it down into smaller chunks is what the impact model is really at the heart of what they're trying to say.
Yes, I love that. I could totally see that working.
Yeah, it's just taking the time to outline it and saying, here's what we're going to do during each session, and then finding the time to do it. That's the time is the enemy of us all,
Yeah, always. Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's really good. Really
yeah.
good.
So now you were talking about writing in the IEP. Do you find that as a challenge for a lot of speech therapists?
Yes.
Like goals or AT in general? What are you thinking?
Just it's a little bit of everything, and so I was at a training on Monday from the state talking about IEPs and a whole different way of kind of doing IEP meetings, which is really cool, like a facilitated IEP meeting where you're, following an agenda and really pulling the parent in more as a participant, that can actually say things and feel okay about saying things. And one of the things that the lady, I can't remember her name, but the presenter said was, for them as the state, it really doesn't matter where you have the certain pieces in about AT as long as they're in the IEP somewhere.
Yes. Yes, I couldn't agree more, right? I mean, yes, just put them in wherever makes sense, right? As opposed to, here's the AT consideration piece and we made sure it was on page 2 and we had to spend hours deciding that it went there. Like, as long as it's in there and the kid's getting what he needs and the parents are satisfied and you are satisfied as an IEP team, what difference does it make where it goes?
Yeah, yeah, and that's what she said. And as long as we are justifying or, you know, just explaining, this is the assistive technology piece or AAC piece. This is why the student is using it, and this is how it's going to help him in school. And and then you put in what you're using, and then just make sure that it's something that's going to be available all the time. Like, don't put in a very specific device if the kid is forgetting it at home a lot of the time, and
Mhm.
making sure that you always have, you know, like backup, I guess. So, you know, say if the kiddo has a device and but they don't bring it a lot or they forget it, then, you know, maybe you have a screenshot of the pages so that you've got that, you know, that backup.
Yeah, you know, and I have been very fortunate the last few years to get to spend a lot of time with, well, and not enough time, but more time than a lot of people get to spend with end users, right? People who have kind of one came out the back end and are using augmentative communication systems as their primary form of communication. And something that I learned right off the bat by spending a couple hours with these people was that just like you and I, like I'm talking with my hands, you know, and I'm nodding and I have multiple ways I communicate, so do they, right? So they have their primary communication system, like you and I primarily use our voice. They have their primary device, but given the situation or the setting, they might flip over to use something else. They might use a low-tech system. They might have two systems that they're using, and it never occurred to me, you know, until I spent time with them. And so I've stopped using the term backup because I don't think they think of it as a backup system when I'm not, okay, I'm using my primary and now using my backup. I don't think of my hands when I'm talking as my backup or when I'm nodding as my backup, but I think of it as another, you know? And so that's how I think of those, like the low tech boards that we use, or anything else that we use, picture symbols. Sometimes if students have sign as a, you know, they learn sign early and they still have a handful of signs, I think of those as alternatives that need to be still made available to them, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I love, yeah, that is a great way to look at it. I like that. It's awesome.
I really like what you were saying too, that the training was about being the parents being having a larger voice in the IEP. I know now in my role, my current role, I work as an assistive technology facilitator. So I haven't sat in a lot of IEP meetings recently. Um, but when I was doing them as a speech therapist, I often felt like I feel when I go to buy a car, you know, like here's all this paperwork. Okay, sign here, sign here, sign. Okay, this means that you're not buying the underwax, you know. Okay, so
Yeah.
and they have this spiel that they go through, and it's a rote thing that they say, and then you just sign off on it. And that's how I often felt when I was doing IEPs. Was that like, okay, just sign here. Okay, this just means that I've given you your rights. Okay, good. Remember the kid's going to need a blah blah blah, right? Okay, we're good with that because all right, good. Let's get out of here as fast as possible. And
Yeah.
you know, it felt cold. It felt like I was selling them stuff as opposed to we're talking about your kid. You know.
Exactly. Exactly. And she even said, like, when you give an introduction, and I really like this piece, she's like, when you introduce yourself, you know, don't say, hey, hi, I'm Ann Page, I'm the speech therapist. And then it moves on to the next person. It would be more like, hi, I'm Ann Page, I'm the speech language pathologist, which means that I am working with little Johnny to help him with his communication, you know, help him with his vocabulary or his grammar or whatever it is in school. And we're going to talk about how we do that.
Absolutely right. I mean, you think about how fast you just go around, and people don't even. You get three people in, and you start to phase out. You know,
Yeah.
and as a parent, one of the things I don't know, this is just a little trick that I learned day one is that I always sit next to them, not across from them, not on the other side of the table. Is that I wait for them to sit down and then I sit next to them so that we're on the same team. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't feel like we're in opposition to each other, that we're working for the same cause, you know?
Perfect. Yeah, that's really good. So I think my Zoom's going to cut me off in 10 minutes. So I don't want to get cut off because I don't have the paid one. So then it's
Oh,
just,
I know. Me either. Yeah, that little countdown thing comes up.
yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
But anything else you want to add? This has been really good. I'm hoping maybe we can do a part two.
Absolutely. Anytime you want to get together, I'm happy to chat. Couple things I would say, maybe to wrap up. When it comes to AAC and writing goals, a lot of speech therapists, the new speech therapists, the word to them, right, would be like, oh my gosh, how do I write an AAC goal? You don't. You write a language goal, right? You keep it focused on the pragmatic function. Maybe have depending on the level of the student, have some sort of syntactic as well. If they're combining words together, but really, you're writing language goals. Just because an AAC device comes in doesn't mean you forget everything you know about language. You lean on that language expertise to be able to write better goals. And I think something else that has been coming out a lot lately, and I know we've been finding it with the IEPs when I work with the speech therapist to generate the proposed goals, is to maybe have less of them and be more specific about what you're measuring. You don't have to try and cover everything at once. You can try and do just 2 or 3 that focus for the year. And the IEP is meant to be fluid. So if you were wrong and you accomplish those way too fast, you can always come back and amend them. And you shouldn't be like, oh man, instead of the meeting I have to schedule and do. That's what they're there for. That's part of it. And so embrace that notion that you might have to come back and do more IEP meetings.
Yeah. And if you meet goals, it's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't, it's okay too. Don't hide it for a year and be like, no, I thought we were making progress. No, a year goes by and sorry, go ahead and get together. And if it's that collaborative of approach, people understand,
Yes.
They're on your side, and they're on the side of the student.
Yeah, I agree. So now, if people want to reach out to you, what is the best way for them to find you?
Sure. So I do a podcast called the AT Tips Cast. It's kind of on hiatus right now because I am in the middle of editing a book. I wrote a book and it went off to the publisher, which is ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education. And it's a book about kind of the new way to do assistive technology in schools. In the old way, it might have been like a kind of an expert model where I was the AT expert person and I would come in and tell you what to do. And now it's more that facilitative role. And so it's how do we do policies and procedures around that sort of new role. The book is about embracing kind of the new contemporary methodologies in education, growth mindset, that least dangerous assumption is in there, project-based learning, and how do we mesh AT with all of these new ways of doing education, because they really benefit students with disabilities greatly, personalized learning. And so AT has a role in all of that, and how does it all fit? So that's what that book is all about. It's scheduled to come out in April if I can get those edits done. And so I'm working on the edits rather than working on the podcast. But there's 155 episodes right now, and we're recording this on the day after Halloween. For years, I did Halloween episodes that are funny, goofy skits that my wife and I would put together. They're scripted out. We write, get my kids involved, but each one focuses on integrating assistive technology into the plot of the story. They're always usually parodies of like we did one. I think the last one we did was a Scream parody, and there was a parody of Poltergeist and fun things like that. But every episode, like I said, there's 155 episodes to go back and check out. Many of them are on augmentative communication, and the last handful I made were on these sort of approaches that I was talking about, those necessary components. So it's attipscast.com, or you can look up the AT Tipscast on iTunes or on your podcast app on your phone. You can reach out to me via Twitter. I'm at AT Tipscast. And my email is attipscast@gmail.com. So there's all of that. And then do you know there's Speech Science is a podcast that's out there right now, primarily led by Lucas Stuber. And he has invited me to participate. Him and Rachel Madel are going to be, the three of us are working together to create a new podcast called Talking with Tech, and that is actually supposed to launch on November 1st, which is today. So we did an interview with Bill Binko, who does AT Makers. We did an interview with Lauren Enders, which I'm sure you know from
Yes.
her AAC fame and her Pinterest board and everything like that. So those are going to be kind of the first episodes we're talking about. So there's all places on the internet you can find
That's
me.
great. That's awesome. Oh, and then I did want to say real quick, I love the little animated piece that you did on modeling.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'll put a link for that too. I send that out to teachers and parents now because it's so clear when you see it that way.
Good. I'm so glad it's helpful. Yeah, that's once I was at a training and I was in the training, right? So someone else was giving it. I was sitting in the back of the room, typing in my notes or whatever. And you know how sometimes those, depending on the conference center that has like a partitioned wall, I could hear the music from that video playing in the wall. I was like, yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Good. Oh, yay. Well, thank you. And tell me how to say your last name right again.
Bugaj, like a happy ghost.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Chris. We'll be in touch then.
All right. Thanks, Ian. Thanks for having me on.
All right.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.